Okay. Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome to another Techstrong learning event. This is a special episode of DevOps Unbound. My name's Alan Schimmel, CEO of Techstrong Media or Techstrong Group. Techstrong Media is a business unit. And welcome to joining us today. For those who've never listened in on a DevOps Unbound before, DevOps Unbound is a video series that we've been doing now here at Techstrong for about, 2.5 years, maybe more. And we do them twice a month. And we delve into, different topics relating to DevOps. And then DevOps is such a many tentacled thing today. There's a lot of topics we delve into. Every 2 or 3 episodes of DevOps Unbound, though, we actually do a live, I was going to say a live studio audience, but it's not really a studio audience. It's not TV. But we do it with a live audience who are joining in with us, and we thank you for joining in with us. And the idea behind it is we let our audience kind of drive the questions and discussion. So we use the Big Marker webinar system here. And that means for most of you, you're doing it in a web browser. There's no plugin. There's no app. There's none of that. You're in the web browser. And if you look to the right side of your web browser is the Big Marker communication interface. And for most of you, it'll say chat up there in a little larger font. And underneath chat is public and private. Twitter, we don't use Twitter. We do use the public chat, and that's where you can talk to us. You keep in mind, though, when you put it on there in public, all of the other attendees to today's event can see it as well, which isn't necessarily a bad thing because oftentimes you ask a question and someone else in the audience will answer it, or one of our panel members will answer it directly in chat, but oftentimes we'll try to elevate it to the group discussion. Now, if you have something, though, that you want to elevate directly to the group, next to the word chat, it's grayed out. If chat is in black, the grayed out is Q&A. And if you go to Q&A and click on that, you'll see there's a separate kind of submenu fly out underneath. And within that, you can actually post a Q&A question, and that won't go to the general audience. It'll come to us here at the panel level. And again, we will elevate that to the panel and have the panel discuss on it. You don't have to necessarily ask a question. You could put your comment, you could answer a question, you could make a statement. The idea here is, audience, we want you involved. This is your show, you drive it. We've got a great group of people that, who I've had the pleasure of doing this with before. And I think you're going to love, what they have to say. I did not mention that, DevOps Unbound is sponsored by our good friends at Tricentis. Tricentis has sponsored DevOps Unbound since day one here. And I said it's been about 2.5 years, maybe more now. And love having them on board with us. They add so much richness to the experience. So many thanks to Tricentis. And if you're not familiar with Tricentis, they are the worldwide leaders in continuous testing. You should check them out at tricentis.com. I'm going to introduce our panel here in just a moment. But before I do, today's episode is Cloud Native Testing, Containers, and Microservices. And how timely. Mitchell and I are just home from Chicago, where we were at KubeCon, Cloud Native Con. And of course, containers and microservices are always a main dish on the menu at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con. But also another one of our presenters here today, April Edwards, was just recently back from GitHub Universe and a bunch of other conferences. And I'm sure containers and testing and microservices were front and center there as well, as they are very much in vogue in today's IT world. So we're going to try to focus a little bit, though, on testing strategies around containers and microservices today. And hopefully we'll be able to illuminate some good strategies there for you. With that being said, let me introduce our panel today. So first off, I want to introduce my friend Brian Dawson. Over the years, I've introduced Brian as one of the key people at CloudBees, and he was one of the key people at the Linux Foundation, doing his own consulting thing. But most recently, Brian has joined as a VP at Deploy Hub, along with our friend Tracy Reagan. And well, Brian, why don't you introduce yourself? I've gone as far as I can go.
Oh, it's so much better hearing you introduce me, Alan. Hello, Brian Dawson. I think one of the things I say is I've spent about 30 years of my career delivering software and technology, and I have pride that I've been an individual contributor as well as a leader in every major discipline, right? From product development to QA to marketing to pre-sales to post-sales. And so I'm always excited, Alan, to jump on DevOps Unbound, participate with Techstrong to bring some of that experience to bear. Currently, I got to get a plug in. I am working with Tracy Reagan at Deploy Hub on delivering an evidence-based security solution for modern microservices architectures to all. So if you're interested, go check out Deploy Hub. Glad to be here with you guys.
It's our pleasure. We're actually lucky to have you here with us, Brian. Okay, joining Brian today is another, well, I don't want to say frequent, but she's been with us before, and we're always happy to have her, April Edwards. April, welcome, and why don't you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Alan. So good to be back. So I'm April Edwards. I think the last time I was on the show, I was with Microsoft. I'm currently at GitHub. I'm what is my title now? Senior Developer Advocate at GitHub. So I work and lead a lot with GitHub Actions. So a lot of the CI/CD automation capabilities, a lot of things like code spaces, development environments, and then also a lot around AI and how we write our code with AI and GitHub Copilot. I am, 24 years in the industry, started in the operational space, moved into the development space at Microsoft, and really fell into DevOps when I started really working in the cloud in 2013. I was working in Azure mostly, a little bit in AWS, and I was automating everything. And that's when I fell into infrastructure as code and better ways of working. And I've been working in the DevOps space since about 2013 now. So until it was, it wasn't really super popular and called DevOps at the time. And then, yeah, here we are.
Absolutely. Thank you, April. And just to be clear, GitHub is part of Microsoft.
So GitHub was acquired by Microsoft 5 years ago, but we're a very independent organization. So when people are like, oh, but you're the same company, they're not. We have separate email systems, HR systems, payroll. We operate and work independently. However, we do collaborate a lot with Microsoft. If anyone watched the keynote at GitHub Universe last week, Satya Nadella came on stage with our CEO, Thomas, and joined in on the opening keynote. So there's very much joint efforts, especially around AI and Azure and what we're doing in the cloud. So there's a lot of collaboration there.
Okay. I'm duly noted. Duly noted on that. All right. Our next panel member, he's also been with us. We've had the pleasure of having him on a few times, and that's Brian Cole. Hey, Brian, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. So good morning, everybody. My name is Brian Cole. I'm the Director of Customer Engineering for NeoLoad here at Tricenta. So I specialize in the load and performance testing space. I've spent decades doing performance engineering and performance testing practices, but have been also heavily involved in the overall continuous quality message and implementation across a large number of vendors. I spent years at the HPE Micro Focus train. I'm now at Tricentis. I was at CompuWare before that. I've been in this space for what feels like ages and really seen it evolve and change in a fascinating way.
Yep. Excellent. All right. Last but not least is my co-host here on DevOps Unbound, as well as one of my partners in Techstrong. Well, I'll let him introduce himself. Mitch. Welcome. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Good to be on with everybody, Alan, and good to be coming back from KubeCon. Boy, we planned this well. Great topics, huh? Cool. I'm Mitch Ashley, and I am CTO with Techstrong. I also head up Techstrong Research, our analyst business, and yes, Eddie, that is a Tele and a Strat behind me. So, and not a Mustang. Asking about my guitars on the wall. So I do a lot of research with customers, analysis, and producing kind of relevant documentation that helps customers and ourselves understand how we adopt technology. So, and that's what DevOps Unbound is about too.
Excellent. So, Mitch, did you mention you were CTO though?
I did, yes.
Okay. I thought I missed it there.
I do want to tell you where I am.
Hung up on the guitar thing and I was all on guitars for a second.
It was a scroll moment. Somebody said guitars, and I kind of.
I was worried. It sounded like it was a surprise. Mitch, did you mention you're my CTO?
Hey, don't make fun of the old guy.
Okay.
All right.
Hey, look, I added up the years, Alan. Collectively, we have about 3 centuries of.
It sounds when April said how long she was on, I said, boy, she's doing something.
It's a long time. Like we've got a lot of years here.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So let's jump into things, right? As I mentioned, today's show is about testing and, as it relates to containers and microservices, and not just testing, but cloud native testing. One of the things, and I had this discussion at KubeCon with someone, is the term cloud native still what we used to think it was, right? Because for a lot of KubeCons, when you said cloud native, it was code for Kubernetes and containers, right? That was cloud native. You were using containers, Docker, Kubernetes to orchestrate.
Looks like we lost
60 projects as part of CNCF. I hope you guys can still hear me. I'm locked up, I think.
No, we can
hear you back.
You dropped for a second.
Am I back?
Yep.
You're here?
Son of a gun.
We can hear you, Alan. We can hear you. Okay.
Well, I think Alan wanted to talk about how we used to know cloud native or how it was defined. Oh, there he is. He's back.
Am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Is this why you asked if you were the CTO, Mitch?
Yeah.
Why? Because I'm on Ethernet, I'm on Wi-Fi, whatever. But so, guys, there's 140 to 160 projects in CNCF right now. Cloud native is more than Kubernetes. It's observability. It's so much service mesh. This platform engineering with cloud native and ops and everything. But one thing I don't hear a lot about is cloud native testing. Is there a subspecies of testing that is cloud native testing?
There is and there isn't. I would say there's certainly all of the existing software solutions people are using for automated testing today are still relevant, whether you're cloud native or not. But testing cloud native applications introduces other challenges into the equation. If you're really leveraging that cloud fabric and you have an application that is self-healing, you click the submit button, that process fails, that backend service mesh understands that it fails, provisions a new instance of that service, tries again, and it's successful. How would you ever know that there was a test failure unless you are tied into this larger cloud ecosystem? You mentioned things like observability. That's a key aspect of being involved in cloud native testing as separate from monitoring. This is kind of a lot of people like to use the two terms interchangeably. They're sort of not. Monitoring is I'm watching the system trying to look for the important signals. Observability is I've built the system to report the important signals to me. And they feel similar, but they're actually very, very different. And one relies on a much more advanced application architecture, which is really taking advantage of that cloud native framework. From the perspective of the tester, your process may not change very much, but the type of analysis you need to do is going to change quite a bit, and what you need to look at and what you need to consider.
Fair.
And I think we take this a step back. I mean, we think of the DevOps cycle where we're deploying already, and we're looking at observability and monitoring as feeding the machine, knowing when something goes down. We're seeing a lot more into our environment setups in terms of how we're automating those, right? Whether that's we can use the phrase GitOps. There's all sorts of phrases out there, but at the end of the day, it's still modernizing how we write our code, right? From starting from that. And that's actually something GitHub has made a huge investment in, the developer experience. And we have this tagline at GitHub that we like to keep developers happy, right? They're more creative, they're more in the flow, all this other good stuff. But the environment which we code from and automate from day one is the start of the DevOps cycle, right? How we plan, how we communicate. And I think that's a critical component into cloud native, is doing it right from day one and getting those tools in place to make sure that you can deliver those things. Because observability is great, but if you got to manually recover from a system, it goes against cloud native. And we have a lot of customers. When I say we, Microsoft has a lot of customers. I can't say that anymore. I don't work for Microsoft. Microsoft has a lot of customers in their cloud that are using microservices, and they're not necessarily testing them with automation, right? They're not starting that from day zero. Still a lot of manual input going into those.
Yeah, and to chime in, Alan, I think over the years I've talked plenty of times about this kind of buzzword bingo, the word soup, that both helps but compromises us as practitioners and people watching. That said, cloud native computing has probably gone through many iterations. I underscore what Brian and April said, is really, it's not just about a deployment target. It's not just about an architectural choice, but to repeat what April said, it's about taking what we learned about the best of modern software development and delivery, which includes native cloud build and deployment, and bringing it together. And so as I typed in chat, I really see shorthand on the onset of cloud native as really being about build where you run, right? Which incorporated with it DevOps best practices, continuous delivery, progressive deployment, right? And with that, continuous testing. So I almost feel like you don't have cloud native without built-in from ground zero continuous and fortified testing practices. So please don't say you're cloud native unless you're looking at how about how you accelerate and optimize your testing.
I agree. One of the things that was interesting, the folks behind Argo, Dan Garfield, was one of the maintainers from not Freshworks. Maybe it is Freshworks. Anyway, Argo is now the third most popular project in the CNCF, running right behind Kubernetes, obviously, and OpenTelemetry, right, are the two biggest. And then comes Argo, right? And that's kind of GitOps, right? For many people, right? And I think that says something about what both April and Brian are talking about, is that people they're developing right in Git, right? And we have IDEs that work in Git. We have testing that works in Git. And I'm thinking, I'll throw it out to Brian Cole as our test expert here today. Is testing right in Git the place where cloud native testing lives today, or at least pre-deployment cloud native testing?
It certainly can be. It's not a requirement, I would say. But if you want to look historically at what's been happening in the quality space as it relates to this DevOps transformation we've all been going through, there was a time in the early 2010s where the vast majority of quality teams began to be cut out of the forefront of what's going on. And that quality effort got removed because the developers are like, I can't wait. I don't have time to wait for you and your archaic legacy processes that are arcane, proprietary, hidden behind whatever test management solution you're using. I was there and advocating for it, so I know how I did it wrong back in the day. And at the same time, you saw the rise of JMeter, of Selenium, of all of these tools that natively worked in the development environment that integrated into Git. And the enterprise testing software suites that are out there today, particularly from Tricentis, have now acknowledged this. They've caught up to this idea. So I'm a Neoload expert. Neoload is a Git client. Do you want to use Git? Absolutely. Go ahead. We fully natively support any sort of Git interface, whether that's GitHub, GitLab, whatever else that's out there. The goal is to align with what the developers need to simplify their lives. Development is already hard enough. When we talk about testing, if we include all of the quality effort that goes on at an enterprise, most organizations, according to SAP and Forrester, spend about 60% of their entire app dev budget on quality. This includes not just testing, but also things like debugging cycles, unit tests, all of the quality effort that's taking place across the landscape. You're spending more than half of all of your investment to make sure that this works properly. So building it in from the ground when you have that opportunity, aligning with where your source code is being stored, these are all massive cost savings down the road. And the biggest issue is that most quality teams just don't have experience with solutions like Git. And that is not an insurmountable challenge. It looks daunting. It is not. And you know what? Your developer colleagues will be very happy to explain it to you and help you ramp up if it means that you're going to bring your testing efforts into alignment with what they're doing.
You know, Alan, one of the things I think, too, building on what Brian said, there is an architectural kind of definition of what cloud native is around microservices and orchestration, et cetera. But I think generally, to Brian Dawson's point, it's a term that's used in a lot of different ways, right? It's almost like cloud native computing is what we're talking about. Applications that are designed and built to run in the cloud and leverage that. I think the other part of it, though, is what April and Brian Cole are bringing up is we're changing how we're testing and how we're doing code quality because we're building it into the dev cycle and the repository tools. And it's not a separate activity or a phased activity. It's something that happens in a lot of different places, right? It might happen in the cloud, but might also have to test something along with, you know, an app that's sitting in my data center or mainframe app or something like that. So I think cloud native testing, yes, it has to know about sort of microservices and doing all that kind of thing, but it has to look at the broader architecture of how we're building applications and the tools we do it in.
And I think something that has changed with cloud native is when I'm working with customers and we have development teams deploying their applications, we have infrastructure teams trying to deploy the infrastructure and whatever that operating workload is that they're trying to work under. And I think the biggest thing we've seen in the industry, and it was one of the Brians that brought it up, was the adaptation to operational teams being able to adapt and get closer to the development teams. And that's part of the DevOps thing, right? And I like going into customers and saying everyone's a developer. And they're like, well, I'm not a developer. And I'm like, well, you are. Are you telling a machine to do something for you? Then you're a developer. So I think we're starting to bring those practices across all of our teams and become the norm and bring those operational teams in so that when they're designing that architecture, looking at those practices and testing. I mean, talking to operational folks about testing before you deploy is mind-blowing to them. Right, bringing that into where they're writing their scripts and doing the things, infrastructure as code or their automation scripts. It's a whole new ballgame, and it's still not widely adopted, but massively useful. And once they adopt it, they don't go back. You don't see someone look at the practices and go, "Yep, I'm giving this up. I'm going back to point and click and never testing anything ever again." They don't do that.
Yeah, April, it's interesting. Both you and Brian triggered something I wanted to talk to. It's interesting in these years working with companies going through digital transformation, whether it's from simply going to CVS to Subversion to then adopting continuous integration, continuous delivery, DevOps, and a cloud native approach, is that oftentimes I see people forget to think about their existing organizational structure. Right. And I think, April, you've underscored directly or indirectly in many of the comments you've made, that things like shifting to cloud native, it involves everybody, or at least if you look at you look at QA, you look at dev, you look at ops. And I think one of the things that I've seen friction with, that I would love to get your thought, Brian, April, Mitch, is dev teams deciding to adopt modern development practices and first just doing it within the dev team alone. Yep, we're going cloud native. We're going to sign it cloud native. We're going to acquire all these tools and stand them up. Then if things are going well, they involve ops. But what's interesting enough is I oftentimes look at traditional QA teams, actually more often than not. And as the dev teams modernize, QA is left chasing them, trying to catch up. I'm just curious if any, is that something you see out there, Brian? Do you
Absolutely.
have?
Yeah. Yes. A big part of my job is evangelism and advocacy. How do you get more investment from your quality process? How do you leverage it more effectively? And the vast majority of my conversations are not, you need to buy a tool. It's how do you leverage the software you already own in a new way and get more value from it by changing your approach. The vast majority of quality teams suffer from kind of an endemic trend that I've seen in the industry for quite a while now. We continue in the quality space to refer to everything as testing. Whereas the developers, when they find something annoying and they want to automate it, they don't call it automated development. They call it something else, a framework, a library, a compiler. They reinvent what it means to be a software developer and change the context of that continuously. Whereas quality doesn't have the same mindset. And that impacts a lot of our ability to converse with our development colleagues, to participate meaningfully in that DevOps toolchain conversation, because that impetus of moving faster, automating everything hasn't permeated throughout every QA organization that's out there. And certainly we advocate for that. We recommend strongly that you need to have automation as part of this, tying into those other kind of talking points around infrastructure as code. I learned it as composable infrastructure. I'm sure there's other terms for it as well, but it is this idea that with a cloud native platform, you can define what you're actually going to be deploying programmatically. And that could be as simple as specifying the size of the machine image you're going to create in a cloud provider. It could be much more involved with that, with things like a CloudFormation template. These types of options allow you to very rapidly create different test scenarios and right size your application investment and make sure that you're going to run it optimally in that cloud environment. And these are things that most QA teams are ill-equipped to have a conversation around.
And I think that's the level set you have to bring in. So as I hate the phrase expert, but as the DevOps experts in the room, whenever we engage with a customer, we start with the culture change. We bring everyone into the project from day zero. There is no discussion bringing people in later. Now, there's often people we have to bring in later from other teams, but we bring everyone in from day zero and go, right, where are we going to start? What's the project? When we go into an architecture design session, whether we're going greenfield or brownfield on an application stack, everyone has to be in the room. Everyone gets to participate. Now, it may not be literally 100 people in the room. It might be a select group of 12, maybe one from each current silo. And I think bringing everyone together and level setting from that first moment makes a huge difference. And then we start ingratiating them into the practices. So we don't get to push code to production until we've done our due diligence with how we're writing our code. We're setting up our guardrails and our development environments. And that is like setting the house on fire, and it hurts and it's hard. But as we all know, when we embrace any DevOps practice, it's the culture change, right? And it's hard. DevOps is hard. It isn't an easy thing, but if we start from day one in the right place, we've had better success on those metrics when we're trying to go cloud native with customers, especially because it enables them to scale up, and where best to start to scale up from in your developer experience.
I like what back to the testing, if you want to call it that. Isn't a discrete activity, right? Developers are writing testing.
That's the message, right? Continuous testing.
Exactly.
It's built, not a stage gate. It's not a phase that you go through. It is a constant activity that continues well after applications have been released into production. You are often going to deploy something, and you'd be well advised to watch it like a hawk. the software industry as a whole, if we look historically over the last 50 years or so, what's our success rate for apps being deployed into production and they just work the way that was intended? It's like 30%. Like it's really hard, to April's point. But tying all this in together, getting the QA teams on board with all of that quality engineering expertise that may not exist in other parts of your organization, that's an important aspect to it. And April hit it exactly right. It's cultural change, not necessarily technology changing, but it's also, it's difficult, but focus on what the expected outcomes are early on, involving everybody in the process. What is your definition of done? Man, I have that conversation a lot with people.
Oh, that is, you know, what's fun about the definition of done conversation is because testing. So there is an engineering playbook that we used to use at Microsoft in our engineering best practices. And it was literally when we start a project, here's our playbook. Testing is from day one. And what's interesting is when you tell people definition of done, you're sitting down for that design session. You're going, right, what's our definition of done? And I'm like, this is we want to have all the sparkles and all the cool bells and whistles. And I'm like, right, what do we actually need to have? Because the reality is you got to start making your shopping list and making that a reality to the customers and the teams doing the transformation. Like the testing takes time, right? But it's part of the process. And that's why the process takes so long. But yeah, declaring your definition of done is critical to success. Otherwise, the goalposts move. And we've all been in those projects where the goalposts move and you're pulling your hair out.
Well, and I want to quickly underscore that aligning around what we're trying to accomplish, what the expected outcomes are. I think we're talking to both within the context of development of an application or an application cycle, but also moving to a modern cloud native process. Cross team, you need to come together. You need to define when we have implemented this process, phase 1, phase 2, or what have you. We've gone through the sprint. What are our target outcomes? And that's important as kind of this cross-functional group that is all required to bring together continuous quality in this modern environment. That's how you get this cross-functional group aligned on where you're going and queued up to work what, as you said, April, is going to be painful, right? Don't do that work up front. You're likely to all end up in different places at the end of the day and rinse and repeat.
And
right?
You're going to pay for it in a very outsized way later. It's the tried and true, very trite sort of graphic, right? How much does it cost to find a defect during the requirements definition phase? Like $1. How much does it cost to fix that in production? $13,000. You've got your own graph with all those numbers. If you skimp on quality, you're going to pay for it later substantially at a substantial interest rate. It isn't, yes, it takes time. Yes, it can be perceived as expensive. And this is another big failing that I see in a lot of quality organizations. They can't quantify the value of what they're doing. If you could, so I remember talking to an executive, he joined an organization, and the first thing he did is, okay, I want to redevelop our quality process. He went into their production support ticketing system and cataloged all of the incidents related to poor application quality that were logged by internal customers, external customers, whatever else, tallied up the costs associated with that, and then went to his boss saying, we lost $55 million on quality issues in our applications over the last 2 years. Can I have 10% of that to buy tooling and build out a team so that I can start to fix that problem? These types of business justification for the effort that you're putting into your quality can be astoundingly huge when you actually do the math behind the scenes.
Absolutely. I mean, we in the infrastructure space, and this is where cloud native, you know, we talk about resiliency and testing in the apps, but what is the cost of an outage? You know, but it's, you know, a breach. And I have a fantastic graphic that I use all the time that does like cost in development's like $80. You know, the cost of the breach in production's up to the millions. And we have so many examples. Uber is a great example. They keep giving me examples on breaches. Literally, they're putting passwords in their code. Like, anytime I give a talk on like breaches and security, it's like, oh, look, Uber in the news again. But, you know, Morgan Stanley's had breaches. You know, you can name all these financial institutions. Yeah. I mean, it's been simple configuration things that they've put somewhere that someone didn't run checks against when someone's pushing their code. And I love the demographic that shows the cost. And so when you go to these organizations, they're like, yeah, I don't want to spend X. You know, this is actually a cost exercise we run a lot with I'm going to talk about GitHub Copilot, which happens to be in everything I talk about these days. But that developer experience when we're writing code, how is Copilot enabling their developers to write code faster, to fix bugs and errors, and write unit tests within their code base quickly? And it's one of the things I talk a lot about. I do a lot of time demoing. We're literally going to customers and going, right, how long does it take your developer to do this task, to write this test, to write this unit test? And let's say that takes them 5 hours. And then we're measuring that against how long it takes them to do it with code. We're starting to take these as hard metrics and OKRs as their development teams are delivering. You know, as we increase our velocity in organizations, we start embracing some of these DevOps practices. How do we take the repetitiveness off of our developers and allow them to be more creative? And that's a lot of the metrics we're pulling off. So there's always the financial aspect, and then time costs money, right? How much are you paying a developer to do a thing? And you know, you're right, Brian, as you said it. Like we go to these organizations are like, yeah, I'll take 10% of whatever your last outage costs you, and I'll fix this. You know, it's a very compelling argument.
And to April's point, security is just a type of quality. I know every security person out there just kind of had a conniption fit, but it really is. And like performance, security is not something you bolt on at the end. You can't, especially performance and security, those are inherent attributes of your application. If you're not implementing practices for those two in particular, it's much easier to fix a functional problem because most functional issues tend to be very binary. They're either working properly or they're not. Performance and security are much more nebulous and much scarier to fix down the line. This investment in quality early on can be hugely impactful and save yourself a ton of heartburn later.
And I think, you know, to your point, Brian, when we're developing, and let's say we're automating something through a pipeline or running tests, and those tests take X amount of time, we start with something small, right? We always got to start with something small and we build on it. It's okay to go back and refactor that thing, especially with cloud. And that's actually part of the cloud native mindset. Like, you know, we've developed our tests. They take an hour to run, which is obtrusive to any developer or QA team or whomever. You know, like what do you do in that hour's time? You know, you lose interest, you get out of the flow, you go make a cup of coffee, you take the dog for a walk, you book yourself a vacation, whatever. So how do we bring that time down? So it's okay to come back to those stats and say, you know, we've done all the things. We haven't done all the things. How can we improve our testing time? How can we improve our delivery time? So once we've implemented it, that refactor piece of our current process makes us a lot more adaptable in the industry. And that is truly cloud native practices, is coming back and refactoring our processes, our development environments, our testing tools, all of that. We don't need to stick with the same tools repeatedly and get the same results.
Guys, I want to interject something and maybe take this a different direction. You know, again, one of the things I discussed with a bunch of folks at KubeCon was just really how widely is cloud native deployed? What percentage of applications of deployments are, you know, quote unquote cloud native? And ultimately, it always comes down to the same thing. Are you talking about greenfields or brownfields? Because everything you guys have been talking about for the last 15 minutes is great. If I have a blank sheet of paper and I want to design the perfect system of how I'm going to do my security testing and my unit testing and my quality testing and how I want my developers to interact with my testers and my ops people, and man, I could design Shangri-La because I have a blank sheet of paper. Unfortunately, most of our audience out here doesn't have the luxury of starting with a blank sheet of paper. They inherit a lot of brown stuff, and you know, and it ain't all pretty either, right? And it doesn't necessarily. So, what makes it, I think, doubly, triply, quadruply hard is, you know, you're inheriting a lot of debt, you're inheriting a lot of bad stuff, a lot of bad juju, and you know, undoing that and getting back to ground zero even to implement a modern cloud native kind of environment with testing and stuff, it's a chore for most people, and so they wind up muddling it, if you will, right? A little of this and a little of that.
Absolutely. And technical debt is debt. And if you don't pay your debts, that bill comes due and with consequences eventually, like any other kind of debt. And when we talk about cloud native, a lot of people that I interact with, at least, look at shifting application workloads from an on-premises deployment into a cloud deployment and think that means that they are cloud native. They are not. A cloud native application is aware that it's running in the cloud and can take advantage of all of those cloud services like elasticity and lateral scalability, different region support. There's a lot that can be done. Containers and microservices make this much easier to do. The vast majority of applications that are out there today are not containerized and not microservice based. Companies are looking at building interfaces and putting components of their application into containers. That is going to be an ongoing journey for the foreseeable future.
And I think you're right, Brian. I think a majority of the workloads that we are seeing is a lot of using the serverless and the microservices to enable these old brownfield systems, right? Banking, FIS, we see a lot of it. How do we do something with this giant monolith? AS400, oh my gosh. I have some great AS400 stories. I don't want to get into that because that's like telling my age. But literally, like, we're using microservices to enable our monoliths to do more. And that actually, while it's a brownfield approach, it's the best way we can not even refactor, give more capability to an existing application stack that may not be able to be refactored very easily.
Well, and I would make the case, and I'll probably make it clumsily here, that a lot of what we talked about early on about how do you initiate this change, how do you embrace some of these modern practices, very much still speak to brownfield. They still speak to modernization of mainframe, right? But I do think it's important to call out, and I don't remember exactly how Brian phrased it. Well, I'll put it this way. Look, there's constraints for the ability of a legacy application to be able to be cloud native. And that goes back to part of it is how do you start to reposition, redirect, and refactor a legacy team? And then I'll go back to just humble, kind of really early days of DevOps with the strangler fig approach. I think the reality is going to be that oftentimes dealing with brownfield, going to cloud native is not a matter of lift and shift your app and then roll out some processes, but it really requires you iteratively take components of the app and you rethink them or build them in another way. The other thing I've seen when we talk about fintech, look, there's legacy systems that carry processes, data, intelligence that are critical. And those can't be moved to what we will call cloud native. So what I often see outside of straggler fig is, okay, how can we abstract key components of that to ensure that we have a cloud native implementation to enable the rest of our cloud native stack to resiliently integrate and interact with our legacy systems. Anyway, long story short, I think up to a point it's entirely doable, but then there are going to be technical constraints and architectural constraints that are going to prevent you from moving cloud native with your legacy app as it stands.
Yeah, here's what I struggle with this conversation. Throughout my career, I thought we would change from one technology to another, and it kind of never happens because there's no business justification for let's use a different database or let's change the architecture to whatever the newest thing is. It seems to me that part of the cloud native fabric is, yes, there's going to be microservices and sort of the architectural definition of cloud native, either for expanded capabilities of existing apps or new applications. I'm pretty skeptical about organizations redeveloping applications unless they're creating sort of the next, what's servicing today is not adequate, and we've really got to rethink how we're doing a certain part of our business. But I think it's more likely an expanded part of functionality in a kind of parallel or additional application, not going back and redeveloping part. And I say that just from my own experience because I went through that process with a SaaS application where we carved off a piece of a monolith and redeveloped it in microservices. And it was a good decision, but it also brought up the issue of most people don't know the code of the monolith system. Those people are long gone and nobody wants to touch it. So it's a minefield of many different kinds of mines. So I think we're better off kind of thinking about how we grow using cloud native, not replace.
Systems are going to need to evolve and change. And it would be great, Alan, to your point earlier about I've got this fabulous white piece of paper and I want to design a perfect system. That also implies you have essentially an unlimited budget as well, that would be great, but that's never reality. And adapting to and including those legacy systems. I have this conversation with people all the time. If you're somebody like a large financial institution and you're managing $1 trillion of assets on that mainframe system, where is your impetus to redevelop it and move it to be cloud native, right? It's been working flawlessly for 40 years. Yeah, let's just change it. That'll work out. Nothing bad has ever happened with that kind of stuff. So that institutional inertia, you just have to accept that some of these things are not going to go away. That providing a new interface to access a system that is already working flawlessly can give you some of the benefits that you're looking for without jeopardizing the functionality of that core system that your whole business relies on.
We, again, I don't want to pitch Universe, but one of the things we announced was customization of the Copilot models this past week. And it was actually a session I helped produce and give. And the reason why we've done it is legacy systems, because the reality is we can't necessarily refactor everything. So a lot of our examples were with some of the hardware providers out there that use legacy code or COBOL, right? And various versions of COBOL. Like I didn't know there were like 6 versions of COBOL. I thought there was like 1 or 2. And I'm working with customers that have various versions. So we can't necessarily refactor the application stack as it stands today. We can hook in some microservices to help ourselves, but our cloud native development practices are where we've targeted a lot of our time. And that customization of Copilot to function on legacy code bases is the best way we can find to make that cloud native entry point a little bit easier for folks. Which is, it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves over the next 8 months to a year with GitHub. But yeah, they've addressed the need. We can't refactor every app. We can't hook in microservices to every app as much as we want to. So it'll be an interesting step in a different direction, I think, than where I've traditionally worked, in that we're refactoring the application stack in the cloud or finding some way to hook in microservices to it versus bringing that into how we're writing the code for it.
And it comes back around to this whole conversation about GitOps, or putting your quality effort aligned much more closely with your development effort. When you start looking at building out these microservices, these interface points to legacy systems, building new container frameworks, if your quality code is associated in the same Git repo with the code for that container, and you're the developer making changes to that container, it's a very small step to think maybe that test needs to be updated. Maybe I need to warn somebody in QA about that. Maybe I need to do it myself. There's a great misconception in the QA space that quality assurance is what the QA team does, which is false. And I've said this on this show multiple times. They do quality control, and everybody does QA. Developers are doing QA all the time. What do you think a debug cycle is? What do you think a unit test is? That's all quality. It's constantly happening everywhere, and all of us do quality every single day without thinking about it. If you walk up to your car, I guarantee you're running at least 3 tests as you look at each of the wheels you can see in the door handle, just to make sure that things look great. You know, you leave your house, you lock the door behind you, almost always you immediately test it to see if it's actually locked. These quality paradigms are built into us as human beings. And the software space is just, it's very foreign to us because it's so new, but we're increasingly seeing quality becoming an important aspect of the process, and that financial impact of high quality applications becoming more and more prevalent in conversations with executives. They're beginning to really grasp that the best thing that you can have is invisibility to your Uber stories, April. as an example, right? You don't want to be mentioned in the news for having poorly performing applications or
mentioned every time April Edwards gets on stage and talks about security breaches, and it's recorded and put on YouTube. I mean,
I'm sure they must love you at Uber at this point.
No one's ever reached out to me yet. I'm like, all right, you guys build more secure software, and I'll stop mentioning you in the news.
That's why I was like, ouch. Just to throw in a thought, right? If you think about this evolution, right? And I won't map it directly to everything we talked about, but I like to say it's like the Golden Gate Bridge, right? You know, the Golden Gate Bridge, as soon as you're done painting it once, you got to go back and start painting it again. It is continuous. If they were to stop painting it, you know, it would turn into a rusty, dilapidated, you know, again, tech debt. It would collect over time. So a lot of the things that we're talking about, think about that analogy. It's a continuous evolution. Alan, in my bid to try to eventually take over your job, I'm inclined to say, I hope, actually, I'll just put it in, that at some point before we wrap here, we can talk about kind of the new challenges that get introduced as you move to cloud native architecture, so you begin to adopt a microservices architecture. How do you manage that? Are there now, as we talk about the cycle of evolution, yet new challenges? But I don't want to impede on you and Mitch, so I'm going to throw it over.
No. Hey, look, first of all, Mitch and I are always looking for replacements.
Okay.
Anytime. Always
sailing the South Pacific, Tahiti, something.
I'm sending you the application, Brian, right now as we speak.
It's a very short application.
Would you do it? Yes. Okay, that's it.
That's good.
Interview complete.
You know what you're in for. Right. Full indemnification.
Yeah, but no. I mean, seriously though. I mean, these are the kinds of questions. Actually, you know what? We've got someone here from the audience who says Cloud Native is having all of your infrastructure on cloud by default, especially for startups. You know what? When I started DevOps.com in 2013, that was the same thing I heard about DevOps. It's great for startups. It's a startup thing. It's a startup thing because you got to wear multiple hats in a startup, and it'll never work in the enterprise. And then sort of a funny thing happened on the way to the cloud. It was the enterprises that adopted DevOps. Startups did pseudo DevOps because they had people juggling hats and just the very nature of it. But true DevOps kind of got defined, or not, it's far from perfected, but it got evolved at the enterprise. And I think, I don't see, and I take almost an opposite view. Cloud native is really hard for a startup.
It is and it isn't. If you have the luxury of net new and you don't have any legacy debt, Cloud Native offers a ton of services. You can go to, Microsoft Azure, for example, and use things like SSO services, database services, all of these things that exist there that you don't have to invest in. You can just build agnostically and generically and dramatically simplify the work that you have to do and focus on those creative aspects, which is the whole goal of all of this. We want our employees to be engaged and enjoy their work, not just our customers to have that delightful experience using the software later. So it varies. I've found large enterprises with rigorous, well-structured, well-thought-out technology practices, leveraging DevOps tool chains and automation. I found large enterprises that I'm sitting there talking to them going, the year 2000 called and they'd like to have a word about test automation. I've had small companies with the same level of rigor, and I've seen small companies that are like, well, we're not going to do testing because that's too expensive and takes too long. It's size of an organization or newness of an organization doesn't seem to be the defining factor. I think it's awareness of the ramifications of what high quality actually means in a business context that really starts to drive that conversation.
Yeah, and I one of the things on kind of this journey I've taken from, I guess I was going to call myself an engineer again. I can't, but right, you spend a certain amount of time as a software engineer. It's sort of ingrained in you. But still, my journey was thinking it was all about us and the tech and what we were generating, the code we did, and realizing that at the end of the day, all of this is about the business, right? For better or worse. It may be a dirty truth for some of us. And the work we do as engineers, developers, and people involved with the development process, however you define, has a lot of impact on the business, and the business has a lot of impact on us. So now we go back to startups. And I think just observationally, look, startups have the ability. In fact, look, if I was to look at my 26-year-old daughter today, recent sort of CS major, and I asked her to go, hey, set up a server, set up routes, set up ingress, she'd go, I don't know how to do that. What do you do? Well, I just go to GitHub, I create an account, right? I deploy some webhooks. A lot of the younger generation that are involved in startups today have a heads up in that their tooling and their way they're deploying things is cloud-based, is cloud native, right? Anyway, but when you look at an average startup, they don't have the wisdom of a wealth of money. They don't have the benefit of time. And oftentimes they don't have the benefit of certain experiences. So now we look at the enterprise side. It starts to become imperative for enterprises, right? What is adapt or perish, right? It was a common refrain. And so enterprise do have experience, they do have budget, and they realize that if they leave it to startups to drive the innovation around processes that result in velocity, they're going to get their butts kicked. What their challenge is what we talked about earlier in the call. They have legacy systems, they have legacy teams, right? So I think it sort of washes out and balances. And Brian, to your point, I've seen surveys that look very odd. They've tended to look U-shaped in terms of implementation of modern practices. Small teams, small organizations, huge organizations. In between, there's been a lot less.
I agree. I absolutely agree with you, Brian. I actually was on a Reddit feed, I want to say it was yesterday, and someone's like, I'm a CS major. Do I need to learn about infrastructure? Do I need to learn about the Linux OS? Because they're code first and they haven't learned some of the fundamentals that I had to learn, because when I deployed an app back in my day, you had to go to the physical machine. You had to manipulate things on the machine to deploy your application stack. That it's very different now. And I think some of these fundamentals are going to change as the kids are getting a little bit older and starting to graduate and see what's happening. They're wicked smart. Like, don't get me wrong, wicked smart kids, but like there's things that we experienced they didn't. They're experiencing things we didn't. But absolutely, in the startup space, they get started in startups, code first. They're being as agile as possible, but they don't always get the funding in a startup. I've been involved with a few startups that are like, we want money. They're like, we need to scale this. How do we scale it? And scalability is a lot of what I spend my time talking about with organizations. They've done a thing, then how do they scale it? And they're not always built to scale if a startup's been fairly successful. So that lends itself to that middle dip you were talking about, that kind of mid-market customer where they've hit that dip. How do they get out of it? So they either need to grow and they need to scale, or they stay in the startup phase, or unfortunately they fail. So there's very much that dip in the middle that we see.
Absolutely. Guys, I'm sorry, but I need to wrap things up here. I actually have yet another video to do at the top of the hour.
Taking away your fun, Alan. Taking away your fun.
I got it. April, Brian, and Brian. I like that, Brian and Brian. Thank you both, all three of you, so much for joining in today. Mitch, thanks as always. Especially, I had to jump out there a second at some issues. Mitch, appreciate you running it through. Thank you very much to Tricentis for sponsoring this one. I think the thing to remember here is, look, cloud native is dominant right now in terms of what we're using to deploy. Testing in a cloud native environment is essential. And, there's different ways of skinning the cat, and there's a myriad of tools out there. But getting it and doing it right, or what's right for you, is the answer. Anyway, join us at our next DevOps Unbound, where we'll have another engaging topic and panel. And until then, though, this is Alan Schimmel for Techstrong and Tricentis here on DevOps Unbound. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.